Sports have always been a popular pastime and major business system in America. However, between the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent justice movements, the already unpredictable sports industry has seen drastic changes. With almost all leagues closing to fans, some creating bubbles to play in, and others canceling their seasons altogether, every league is having to adapt for the time being. Hopefully, we will all soon be able to be around each other once again, all while keeping each other's safety as the #1 priority. Now, my topic today is why the NFL is the most engaging professional sports league in America. This is due to a number of reasons, some being league format, draft format, exciting free agency, and more recently, the popularization of fantasy football. Now, starting with league format, the harsh nature of football plays to the advantage of engaging fans. Because of the physicality involved in the sport, it can only be played once a week. A shorter season combined with a longer amount of time in between games only allows there to be 16 games per regular season. This is in comparison to basketball, 82, hockey, 82, and baseball, 162. A shorter season is significant to fan engagement because there's a greater amount of importance placed on each game. The difference between 10-6 and 9-7, while it may seem insignificant, is the difference between going to the playoffs or not. This greater importance on the regular season is part of why Nielsen measured NFL regular season viewership at an average of 16.5 million viewers per regular season game last year, up 5% from the year prior. For comparison, the NBA tanked with a 15% viewership loss and only averaged 1.5 million viewers per game. Baseball saw increases across the board, but still only gathered 2.5 million viewers per game last year. Playoffs tell the same story, with the NFL's Super Bowl gathering more revenue than the World Series and NBA Finals combined. Now, while league format certainly plays a large part in the NFL's popularity, other driving forces are the draft and free agency. In the 1970s and 80s, baseball ruled the sporting world. Free agency hadn't really come to fruition yet, and the NFL draft was something you might read about the day or week after it happened in the newspaper. Fast forward to 2020, and over 15 million people tuned in to watch their team make its first-round selection in the NFL draft. In comparison, the MLB draft only gathered 611,000 viewers. A big difference for this is that the NFL draft is very simple and easy to follow, with the worst teams getting the best picks. Also in the NFL, many players contribute to team success from day one, while in baseball, most players don't even play for the team that drafted them for half a decade. Before free agency and a televised draft, leagues could really only keep fans engaged for as long as their playing season was active. This played as an advantage to baseball as it has the longest calendar season and a disadvantage to football as it has the shortest. Today, with year-round coverage of every sport, it leaves the most popular sports to be decided by the most engaging, not the longest. Now, while the draft and free agency certainly helped the NFL, it took place very gradually and over a long period of time. There's nothing in recent years that propelled the NFL faster or as far than fantasy football. The Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association estimated there to be 60 million fantasy players in 2017, with over 3/4 of that being football. They also estimate fantasy to be a $7 billion industry. While every sport has a fantasy league, few will argue against football having the best format for it. Also, while some argue that fantasy is just a game, it's actually a huge factor in fan engagement, especially getting the younger generation involved in football, with over 50% of players being under the age of 34. Also, it is crucial to fans with losing teams, as without it, they would quickly lose interest in the season. For those of you who have never played fantasy football, leagues are virtual and on one of ESPN, Yahoo, NFL.com, or a different third-party site. Most leagues are between 8 and 12 teams and start with a 15-round draft. In those rounds, there are quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, kickers, and defensive/special teams. On a week-to-week basis, these players earn points depending on their performance. In standard leagues, just like regular football, fantasy players go head-to-head against each other, and whoever's team has the most points at the end of the week wins that week. The teams with the best record at the end of the year go on to the fantasy playoffs, and whoever wins the fantasy playoffs is the champion. Personally, this will be my 5th year playing fantasy football, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. It is one of, if not my favorite hobbies, and I found myself to be somewhat good at it. In my years of playing, I've found fantasy to be in some ways similar to the stock market. While that may sound unrealistic at first, with a closer look you can see the similarities between the two. In the stock market, you buy stocks in companies, but in fantasy football, you buy stocks in players. In the stock market, there are overvalued and undervalued stocks, but in fantasy, we call them busts and sleepers. In fantasy football, you can buy stock in players by trading for them, picking them up off the waiver wire, or just drafting them. And you can sell stock in players by trading them away or dropping them from your team. In both fantasy and the stock market, two terms commonly used are buy low or sell high. Buying low in fantasy football is the act of trading for a player who you believe has a value lower than what they'll produce in the future. This can be because of any number of reasons, really. Return from an injury, an increased role, or really just a gut feeling. Selling high is just the opposite. It's trading away a player who you believe has a value higher than what they'll produce in the future. There are many other smaller similarities between the two, but I'll just keep to those larger ones for now. To wrap it up, fantasy and the NFL, fantasy football and the stock market are similar in many ways down to the terminology used. Fantasy sports continue to skyrocket in popularity and show no signs of stopping. The fantasy industry continues to propel all leagues, especially football. This is one of the many reasons why the NFL is and will continue to be the most engaging professional sports league in America. Thank you for listening.